hierarchy template, and which is one of the templates that can be used in quite a wide area of cases, and due to its very structure, you can see it in all kinds of visual stories. Today we will be briefly going through the following sections of what it is a hierarchy template and when it's best to use one, and also when it's better not to use one, because due to its modularity and easiness of making one, it's being used in cases where ideally it shouldn't. We will walk you through the different layout options, such as the Sunburst or the Treemap or the diagram tree, and the bar hierarchy option. We will walk you through colors and filters and how these work and how they can enhance a visualization made using the hierarchy template. We will also cover pop-ups, which work a bit different than the other templates are on Flourish. And then we will walk you through telling a visual story with the hierarchy template using our Flourish stories feature. But let's start at the start. What it is a hierarchy template, because it may sound self-evident, but it's not always the case. It starts by the origin of the word, which comes from ancient Greek hieros and archo, which means holy and rule, and essentially it denotes a mode of government where the priesthood has the power. But nowadays, it's also a template at Flourish. It's better to use this template when you wish to showcase internal relations and structures in your dataset that entail some kind of hierarchical relationship, something that entails and features something else. And essentially, it's best used when you wish to showcase also the inner workings and the breakdown of your data or different facets of your data set. As we can see in this example here on the GIF, which we will go through in more detail later, we can see different categories containing smaller other categories, and by clicking on each category, we can delve down on it and see what it is comprised of. What is not is a substitute for an infographic, because it looks visually appealing. So in many cases, you can have people using dendrograms or radial trees for creating essentially visualizations that do not feature hierarchical relationships. As we can see in this example, it's just a bar chart made with a hierarchy template, which is not as well a substitute for a bar chart. And as I said, it can function as a shortcut into presenting quickly in a flashy way information, but it's way more than that. And since we spoke about the different layout options, since this will be the first question to ask yourself, what layout option is better or better suited to present your dataset, let's go through the strengths and the limitations of each one. Let's start by the Treemap, which is essentially the most basic and the most common way to visualize a dataset that features hierarchical relationships. And it consists of blocks or rectangular shapes of any kind containing other rectangular shapes and blocks inside them. It's better used when the display level does not consist of many categories, because if you have a lot of rectangular shapes in a visualization, you tend to kind of lose track. And also it's better suited for showcasing significant or sizable differences than small or finely grained differences due to its rectangular shape. But also something that I haven't noted here, it's also that due to its rectangular shape, it's very useful and for using in the web, because it can essentially take up the whole of the screen space, whatever the screen width that the user is on, either a mobile or a tablet or something. We'll go through how to create a hierarchy template in a little bit, so we will not just showcase this. The next one is packed circles. As we can see, it's the same logic as the Treemap, but instead of rectangular blocks, it contains cycles containing smaller cycles in it. And it's better suited to display large data sets with a lot of elements and their relations to the whole and to each other, because you can fit way more cycles in a space when we're talking in a visualization context than blocks, without losing the visual appeal of the visualization. As we can see in this example, takes a bit to load because the dataset is fairly large. As we can see here, we can present quite a lot of information. Again, it's better suited for significant differences, although it's a bit better at presenting even smaller differences. And one point that we should keep in mind that it's a bit tricky is minding the labels, not to overlap, and being easy to read and legible. And also, as I mentioned, is pay attention to sizing of the different cycles, and in order to be easy to break down the different categories and the differences contained within a category. Moving on, a brief look at the Sunburst, which is one of the very cool looking template layouts of the hierarchy template. Essentially, it's a Treemap like the one we saw before, but it uses, instead of rectangular blocks, use a radial layout, and the rings present different hierarchical levels, while the innermost ring is usually the first, followed by the second and the consequent levels, which show a breakdown of the components of the first, etc., as we can see in this example made by the World Bank. Well, let's scroll down a bit. As we can see, it's quite a lot of categories. By using this layout, we can easily navigate inside this template of different expenditure values. And as we can see as well, color is a quite significant way to emphasize different aspects of our of our visualization. As you can see, is very cleverly made in order to guide you through the different categories by using this essentially weaker tints as one moves from the inner to the outer link. Yes. In a similar vein, we can see the radial tree example, which is essentially a dendrogram, which is a treegram. It follows the basic structure of tree branches and using clusters as the points where the user can interact with. And its main selling point is that it can showcase the entirety of the hierarchical relationships at the same time in a visually appealing way, as we can see in this example made by one of our clients of the top 300 cities, if I recall correctly. As we can see, each cluster represents a geographical area. By clicking on it, we can see in China, for example, the largest cities. By moving between focus levels, we can navigate between them. Here, South Africa, for example. And as we can see, its limitation, or most probably something that we should keep in mind, is we should make provisions for having adequate space in order for the labels to be able to be displayed without problems and not being cut off. And which is also an issue that the more data you have, the more prescient it becomes. Last one of the layout options is the bar, which is essentially a bar chart that can accommodate hierarchical relationships, and this way you can add more into the chart. However, as I mentioned before, it should only be used when there is some hierarchical relationship in the dataset that you wish to visualizing using the bar layout. And enough of the showcase. Let's see how we can make one. And let's start by the nesting. Nesting is essentially how the hierarchy template works. It's the data binding that decides what category should contain what other categories. We're essentially being able to set the order of our dataset and our hierarchical relationships, since hierarchy is all about order. As we can see, we have this dataset here by DEFRA, which is about live animal exports in 2015, what animals the UK exported to which country, which I had downloaded, but I have already cleaned since it featured some empty columns. So let's see how to make a hierarchy template. Let's scroll down. This is our blueprint, which has already populated our day with data. Let's upload our data. As we can see, as I told you, I have already downloaded the dataset. I pressed upload and overwrite the existing data since we do not want to merge. And now, time for nesting. As we can see, nesting is essentially the order that we specify and essentially setting our hierarchical relationship. Now, it does make a lot of sense, but if we want to, let's say that we want to break it down first by the commodity type. For example, what kind of species, for example, the UK exports, then focusing on the different commodities, which is a horrible word, but in bureaucratic speak means what kind of animal, and then the destination country, and filter it as well optionally by destination country. As we can see here, and also moving on, after setting our hierarchy, we can toggle between the visible levels area, which sets how many levels of the hierarchy should be visible on the outset. Well, let's set it to 1. And as we can see here, we have quite a lot of poultry and fish. And if we could change the hierarchical relationship, for example, by choosing to nest first by country, then by species, and then by kind of animal, which is way more popular and way more full of data on the outset. So let's switch back to our previous mode of nesting. As we can see now, we can click on the dataset and see, for example, that the UK exported 12 cockatiels in 2015, 3 to France, 3 to Greece, to Canada, Spain, USA, and yada yada. Moving on, quite significant is the issue of colors, because as we saw, there are quite a lot of data on the hierarchy template. So color is key in bringing to the fore different aspects of your data set and telling a visual story. As we can see in this example, which is based on poverty data in the UK, we can see that the amount of people in poverty and not in poverty are colored in a way that it leads the user and leads the eyes of the user towards following a very specific story. And also on the nitty-gritty of the issue, you can toggle with the colors like in the other templates by switching between different palettes or playing around and editing the colors or using custom overrides. For example, if we wish to use black for birds, we can just type it in on the color custom overrides section and change the colors accordingly. By using filters and adding filters, it's you can toggle between different aspects of your data set, and also you can choose more than one values to size, and you can switch between them. So essentially being able to tell more than one story, as we can see in this example. Let's switch to full screen mode. As we can see in this example, we have sized by units sold in this data set containing DAMI data of sales. We sized by units sold and total revenue. And as we can see, we can switch between those and get a different hierarchy than the initial one. And moving on, regarding pop-ups, we should explain that pop-ups work a bit differently because due to the multiple levels on this template, you must think about it in the context of a hierarchy in order to make it more clear. As we can see here, the first thing that you must think about is content regarding the individual rows, which means the individual cells. For example, how this should be. And you have options to leave it to auto or use custom content and use HTML. But also, since you have a hierarchical format, you can toggle between different styles and of visualizing pop-ups that contain other categories, as we can see, the mid-level and the top level. As we can see here, we have a pop-up content for multiple rows, which means, for example, whole categories, not just individual values. And we can use a breadcrumb, which essentially tracks the value chain and the hierarchy. For example, zoo animas Turaco 3, and you can switch the breadcrumb separator, or also you can hide the value outright and just get the category name. And also you are able to toggle between different active levels. If you only want pop-ups for the categories, only for the bottom level of the visualization of the individual values / blocks, or the one above the bottom, and so on. There are quite a few different options. And since we are nearing our end, and there's a bit more to go through, let's focus on using hierarchy in Flourish stories, which is a very useful way in order to being able to integrate all the things that we saw until now. And it's a very apt way of using a hierarchy template and telling not only one, but quite a lot of visual stories hiding in a data set. As we can see in this example that we have created, my colleague Lindsay to be precise. Let's move on full screen mode. These are data on poverty levels in the UK by the Department of Work and Pensions using a Radial tree. And we started from a visible level of 1. Then we added a second level using a story. We added another layer to the Sunburst in order to be able to delve deeper into the dataset and seeing the inner workings of our data. Also, we are being able to filter a particular segment and see the proportional breakdown of the data containing it. And for example, in this case, we can see that by focusing of the people being in poverty, you can see that over than half of them are in work and are working. And it's an element of the story that if you wouldn't have used the story, it's very possible that it could have been lost or not quite made the same kind of imprint on the user. Or we can even add another layer in order to being able to split between couples and single income households, as we can see here and here. And it's also possible to reorder things in order to show a different story. For example, here we have a couple and single category that have been moved up in order to show that a lot of them are single workers, workless people without children who are in poverty. Let me demonstrate that again, because it's quite a small movement that makes quite a lot of difference, as we can see here. And it's also quite easy to swap between different hierarchy layouts, like the Treemap that we saw before. And this way, you would be able to see which works better for your needs and which looks nicer and which is better suited to your visualization needs. I think that is all. So if you have any more questions or you wish to learn more about the hierarchy template or about other templates or how to use Flourish, we have also our help docs, where in the hierarchy template section, you can find more information on how to use and troubleshoot issues arising when you use this template. We have our Flourish blog, where it's a repository that you can be in touch and stay informed about new and hidden features. And in the similar vein, the Flourish newsletter or the FT visual vocabulary, which is a good repository when you're not sure which kind of template and what kind of visualization is better suited for the kind of story that you wish to tell. And as we can see that we are just on time, I want to thank you. And if you have any more questions or any comments or any feedback at all, feel free to reach out to priority support at flourish.studio, and we will be more than happy to answer your questions or any queries that you might have. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.